Welcome, everyone, to our 2026 Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy Scenario Workshop. Before we get started, if anyone is needing any online translation services, there are instructions here, or put something in the chat if that will help. We can assist in getting you set up with what you need. Okay, with that being said, just want to talk briefly about what we're going to discuss tonight. For starters, who we are, our agency, Madera County Transportation Commission, as well as what is the plan we're working on, the Regional Transportation Plan and the Sustainable Community Strategy. What are the Sustainable Community Strategy scenarios, SCS scenarios, we call them short. That's a big part of why we're here tonight. And then we're going to want some feedback on some of the information we have to present to you about the SCS scenarios. So with that, let's just jump in really quick about who we are at MCTC. We are the regional planning agency for Madera County. We are also the metropolitan planning organization for Madera County. We do comprehensive planning. We foster intergovernmental coordination between the two cities, the county, as well as our state and federal partners. We undertake comprehensive regional planning with an emphasis on transportation issues and provide a forum for citizen input into the planning process. We also provide technical services, technical analysis for plans such as the one we're going to talk about tonight, assistance to our partners at our agencies as well for some of the technical transportation analysis they sometimes work on. So we are responsible for the development and adoption of the Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. This is a requirement for MPOs such as us based on the size of our county. So what is the RTP? We call that for short. It's a long-range strategic document that outlines the transportation needs, goals, and proposed projects for a specific region, typically covering about a 20 to 30 year period. So it's a long-range plan. It aims to improve mobility, reduce congestion, enhance safety, and support sustainable economic growth by addressing infrastructure gaps and prioritizing transportation investments. Now, a major component of the RTP is the Sustainable Community Strategy. The Sustainable Community Strategy is part of our plan that aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions per capita, meaning there's a reduction for every single person based on what we're able to analyze on our plan's investment, what our land use growth patterns are, what type of transportation projects we're funding, and so forth. So what exactly is the SCS supposed to do? The California Air Resources Board has assigned a greenhouse gas reduction target for our county. Madera County must reduce greenhouse gas emissions per capita by 16% in the year 2035 versus the 2005 amount per capita. So whatever the average person was outputting for GHG emissions, that amount has to be 16% less in the future in 2035 than it was in 2005. Now, a component of the SCS involves scenario planning. We are required to make at least 2 distinct scenarios that have different land use and growth patterns or strategies, and we have to analyze them against each other to find out what different results can be achieved if we take different paths towards this goal of reducing GHG emissions. For our plan, we're actually doing 3. We typically do more than 2 just because we want to have a robust set of options to consider. Each scenario must use a consistent regional forecast, such as the projection of population growth, the housing makeup, and as well as employment makeup. There's not a significant higher amount of population in one scenario versus the other. We work in a uniform world where we assume there's that same rate of growth, but it's what we do with that growth that matters to make these scenarios distinct. Each must be analyzed for and evaluated for vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas reductions per CARB regulations. And CARB, again, was California Air Resource Board. So with that, we did partake in quite an extensive outreach effort starting in 2024 and 2025 to talk to people about, what matters to them, what values are important in light of the plan we have to make, the responsibilities we have to demonstrate our ability to meet the state's goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We got a lot of information at workshops like this, as well as out in the community at an array of events. We went to quite a few events, actually. We also worked with a committee of local stakeholders to kind of vet the information we got from the public versus the technical work that we need to do to find a good solution for what the scenarios should entail. So with that, we do have a matrix that describes some of the distinct elements of the three scenarios we're working with. The first scenario, scenario A, it builds off existing preferred plans or preferred scenarios from past efforts on this plan, in particular the 2022 RTP-SCS. That followed adopted regional forecasts and general plans. It emphasized infill development more than the other scenarios in particular, and also dealt with lot sizes, the amount of housing units that are on per acre. There was it maintained roadway system with targeted safety and congestion improvements, and there was limited transit-oriented development in some of the core urban areas or around the planned multimodal station for Amtrak and high-speed rail on Avenue 12. Scenario B, one second while I move my notes. Scenario B had a more transit focus, public transportation focus. It's called the Transit Supportive Development. It has a similar regional growth forecast, but is more aligned with some of the more historic trends in the Madera County and the Valley. The growth was focused on existing or planned future transit corridors. So where there is available room for new development, there was a prioritization towards certain areas that are on those transit corridors for the growth. We mentioned earlier that our plans are consistent with local plans. So that doesn't mean we can just load all new growth on a transit corridor. There's general plans and housing elements that lay out where growth is going to happen in the county. We just prioritize certain areas where we have the flexibility that allows us to prioritize key portions of those corridors. And then our third scenario we came into was affordable housing focus. This looks at those available developable areas and prioritizes more affordable housing types to be developed there. This actually has a lot of overlap with our other two scenarios. For our transit corridors are often intermixed in these same areas that are most suitable for more affordable housing. So they're not incredible differences between some of the scenarios and the way they perform. However, we do prioritize with the land use scenario process, that more might be on the corridor for scenario B, where scenario C still has that amount of housing on that corridor, but it might be more interspersed out other parts of the county as well. So there's some commonalities across all these scenarios, such as our farmland and resources being essentially barriers for having too much growth. Like I said, we are consistent with our plans. There's not going to be a hospital plan to be on the beaches of Hensley Lake, for example, or a large business building in the middle of neighborhood uses. We do adhere to what the plans say about how the county should grow. There's a lot of work has gone into those documents, more than we do for this process in developing the general plans, housing elements, and so forth locally. Also, all these scenarios maintain the roadway network with a full schedule of maintenance and operations and other projects. And they all also assume high-speed rail service will happen as planned in the high-speed rail business plan, which I think kicks off around 2032 now. So we'd go through a process to incorporate those land use scenarios into our technical analysis tools. We call it our travel demand model. And that assigns different land uses in different parts of the county consistent with our partners' plans, and then integrates those with our transportation strategies. What projects are being built and when? And we're able to model future conditions with our travel demand model doing that. And that is where we do a lot of analysis once we've done that modeling on the results. So we can report to agencies like California Air Resource Board or the Environmental Protection Agency and other oversight agencies that will review this plan. We've identified several key performance indicators from the modeling results. GHG reduction per capita, of course, as well as vehicle miles traveled per capita. We also look at other air quality concerns, especially those assigned by the federal government, things like particulate matter 2.5 or PM 2.5, it's called, or ozone pollution. There's other pollution that we do track, monitor, and report on to the federal government through this process as well. We looked at the percent of future housing in non-single family units, so shared units or maybe apartments, things that do tend to have more housing units per acre, which does lend itself to better results as we do analysis on these types of scenarios. We've looked at congestion in the form of travel time, something our model does output data on. How long is the average trip? And then as well as we've looked at transit trips. So with that, we do have some results. Now, I do want to preface the results by saying we have not put the raw numbers on all of these metrics because outside of the few people that work in my field, they will be meaningless if I tell you 0.8% shift of this metric or that metric. We wanted to compare them against each other to say which performs the best when we look at the three scenarios only compared to each other and not just giving numbers that might not have a meaning to a lot of people outside the transportation industry. So with that, when we did the scenario modeling, the highest performer for greenhouse gas reduction was scenario C, where our previous 2002 RTP scenario had the least amount. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad or doesn't meet the goals or objectives. In fact, it does meet the goals and objectives of greenhouse gas reductions we have. It just doesn't go quite as far as scenario C would in that matter. And scenario B landed in the middle. For VMT per capita, we see the trend stay exactly the same, that the affordable housing scenario performed the best in terms of reducing the total amount of vehicle miles traveled in Madera County. And then finally, for air quality, again, the same pattern persists. And we put these three on the slide together because they all really do relate to each other, especially the amount of vehicle miles traveled influences how much pollution is generated on the greenhouse gas emissions side, as well as our other federal air quality criteria pollutants. That one gets me sometimes. So they all do have that relationship. So the results make sense, especially in light of the VMT per capita. Now, we did mention that there are some other performance metrics that we look at. Now, these are a little more mixed in the results that were achieved. So the percent of future housing in non-single family units, the most was actually in our old scenario. The least in the scenarios we're looking at for this plan was with scenario B, the transit supportive development, and then there's a moderate amount in the middle with scenario C. And again, we mentioned that that percentage being higher does lend itself to better performing results for greenhouse gas emissions because it's just much easier to have a non-single family unit to have a better proximity towards all the land uses that might be around it. One house can have one family, but one shared unit in the right location, might have several, and it's just several people that much closer to the destinations they need to go to instead of one house. And then for congestion, I mentioned this is a measurement of delay time or vehicle time traveled. How long does it take your average trip when we take all the trips that happen every day in Madera County, point A to point B, and we average those out. Again, we see scenario C was able to perform the best on that, reducing the most amount of congestion and shortening those travel times. The worst was the transit supportive development. And then our sixth performance indicator was the transit trips. And it makes sense. It validates our idea and our scenarios, I think, that the transit supportive development would drive up the highest amount of transit ridership. And with that, I have the wrong happy face, I noticed, but for transit trips, it's actually almost equal amount between scenario A and scenario C at the moderate level, not significant enough for one to really be over the other. So this is a general overview of our very happy faces to kind of meh faces in the middle of how everything performed when we look at our performance indicators after running the scenarios. Now, we want to talk about this and those scenarios a little more and how you can interact and give us feedback about what you think is most appropriate for Madera County in light of those goals we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce vehicle miles traveled, and so forth. We need to balance our local goals with those state requirements that we have to meet that objective. And that's where our public, our stakeholders, the people that live and work in Madera County come into play to just give us their idea or their opinion on which they think will work better. We're going to take one of these three scenarios to the end of the process and select it as our preferred scenario for the plan. Once we have identified that preferred scenario, we begin to do even more analysis and more reporting, including an environmental impact report that accompanies the RTP and SCS. And we finalize our planning process around that preferred scenario. And that's what we will submit to our state and federal partners for review when we adopt this plan. So it's important to give us an indication of what you think really works the best in light of what we're seeing with these results so far. Let's see here. And I do have some information available for anyone that is viewing this currently online. You can take your phone out right now and scan this QR code and participate in a questionnaire that goes over those three scenarios. It goes over what they accomplish and what differentiates them from each other. You'll see something very similar to this, where you get an overview of how they all perform against each other in the performance metrics that we have available. And then you can choose for yourself. So I think we've got quite a few responses already. So we're looking forward to more people checking this out. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, tell everybody you know. That would be great. The more people that contribute to what we do in this process, the better our plans become. And with that, I'm going to close out my presentation. On our screen is some contact information for our management team for this project. Feel free to reach out. Let us know if you have any questions or comments you want to give. We're always ready to take those and have a discussion. So thank you for participating. I will now open up for any questions about any of the slides or what we discussed in this presentation. Do we have any questions online?
No questions online.
Okay, great. Thank you. If you're watching this, then it's more than likely you're watching the recording that I will be posting online after this is over. So thank you very much. And we will hopefully see you soon. Down the road, as they say. I think we're set.